I am Barry Rogers. I am the visiting professor of practice in psychological and behavioural science at the London School of Economics, and I am an editorial fellow here at the Institute, where I participated in the monthly programme in April 2024. What I wanted to do today was to give you a flavour of what it was I did at the Institute, what I came here to look into, to research, to try and understand, and not just to give you a summary of that, but to link it to something that happened while I was here, how I changed my thinking, how something unanticipated came to, as I said, impact the direction of that. But before I go there, let me say a little bit more. I've got another dimension to my role. I'm a pracademic. I sit at the intersection between academia and practice. Specifically, I design and deliver customized executive education inside global organizations. And I witness a phenomenon, I witness a problem in that, and I've done it for over 25 years, that I can do something very successful in the classroom. I can get people to know things. By the end of the week, they can test that they have learned something. They look as if they've enjoyed themselves, they're satisfied, and most of all, they're committed. They say they're committed to taking this back and doing things differently in the workplace. Yet, I watch them walk out of the room and actively forget everything we've talked about as they go back into the context of action, traction, and distraction in everyday life. Now, this problem has intrigued me. It's fascinated me. It's been the defining feature of my scholarly and personal life. And because of that, I guess like you, the first thing I did, I thought to myself, I can't be the first person to think about this. So I went back to the literature. And I found back in the early noughties that there was not a lot within the literature. I literally reviewed thousands of articles and books and various things. And you see that actually what happens after programs, there's not a lot there. And what is there, the dominant way of thinking about this, the transfer of training literature, is very reductionist, very individualistic, and it's methodologically and conceptually not capable of painting a picture of this landscape. So, with that in mind, I thought to myself, I need to do something about that. Because if this was not going to be useful in some shape or form, what was the point of the 25 years that I've spent doing what I've doing? What is the purpose of my time? And on top of that, this is a huge industry. In the last year alone in the US, $78 billion was spent on large corporate programs without any real sense how that money has an impact. So the year 2006 was a real turning point for me in terms of my thinking, this research. And two things happened in that year. First, I was approached by the chief executive of a large global energy company to help them navigate towards the energy transition away from fossil fuels, and specifically where I was concerned, to work with the senior deal makers, those that shape the deals that will shape the country, that will shape our energy future, and really help them to question some of their deep taken for granted assumptions about what constituted value in a very different world. Now, I have an interest in sustainability. This was fascinating for me. It was something I wanted to do, and it was something where I thought I could have a real impact. But I had a problem, and the problem was still this whole issue about thinking, if we go this route about how we do this with formal programs, how do I know that this is not just some form of elaborate and expensive greenwashing? And that's when I went back to the work of Donald Schoen. Okay? Schoen had this fabulous book, The Reflective Practitioner, and deep inside the first chapter, there is an image that Schoen comes up with called the mountaintop and the swamp. And as I read this, it really helped me think differently about this distinction about the way we think, we know, we operate when we're on a program, and how we feel, we know, we operate afterwards. Two very different experiences. And Sean points to this distinction that we're on the top of the mountaintop. Academics have the ability to look back at their data with clear sight in the clear light of day, and everything looks as if it can come together in a relatively coherent type of fashion. But the people that they are talking to are in the swamp. They don't have that luxury. They're dealing with the minutiae of politics and power and everything that comes together on a day-to-day basis. And that dialogue between the two is a real problem. But this was a superb way for me of trying to understand the distinction that I was seeing between what was happening on the program and what was happening afterwards. I needed a way of capturing the experience of the swamp. And so I went back to the programs I was doing, and between 2006 and 2012, in 40 different programs around the world in different organizations, I asked them to do a simple exercise. At the end of the program, I gave each of the participants a small box, and I asked them to put on the box what it was that got in the way of them doing what they said they were going to do when they left. And as I looked at that and I categorized it, one thing came out more than anything else: their relationship with time. 40%, over 40% of the responses were time or time related. So a way of capturing the essence of the swamp was capturing that nature of time, not just linear time, but non-linear time. The idea of flow, philosophy, but most of all, distractions and interruptions. Well, we are out of the office, and it's a nice swamp, but this is closer to the experience of the swamp. This is the everyday setting that participants return to. And I had a way of thinking about that. I had a way of capturing it. I now needed a way of making sense of it, some form of tool or methodology. And I decided to try and visualize it, and visualize the nature of time. And as I said, not just in the form of a clock that is linear, but to capture all those dimensions of time, linear and non-linear. And I decided to do that in the form of an electronic diary. And the work that I have done as part of my time at the Institute is to tell the story of the development, the evolution, and the implementation of that tool. That is, I think, the largest, longest, most comprehensive study of its type that there has been. It's a process study. It's an action-orientated process study that spans 18 years. It deals with 1,800 participants. I spent 355 days of my life, 24-hour days. The nature of the company that I was working for had a hotel in its head office. I literally was there all that time. It allowed me to pull together an ethnography that is over and has over 5,000 notes as part of it. There are 115 formal interviews. And the implementation process has in itself 350 interviews plus 60 group studies. Okay? All of that came together and was analyzed in a amended form of process tracing that looked at the data not just after the fact, but also as it was happening. And what did I find? I found, as I thought, that even if you leave these programs full of good intentions, full of good commitments, that in the period immediately after the program, there is a huge fall off in terms of intentionality. Something like 40% of that commitment you had as you left was gone after 18 days. But what this also allowed me to do was to paint a picture of what that period after the program looked like. And it was very deep and rich in dimensions of temporality. It was full of contradictions. It was full of this liminal sense of the temporal expectations of others. But most of all, it was full of practices that were deeply imbued with temporality and were deeply defined by identity. And it was getting to those practices and using the tool and the methodology to be able to work with those practices that allowed us really over a period of time to bring about some considerable change. The evaluation associated with the project, as you'll see in terms of what I've written, was quite comprehensive and actually in the end proved to be quite successful. But there was a sting in the tail. There was a sting in the tail about the level of analysis that I was employing. And I wanted to come to the Institute to look at what I thought was what I wanted to focus on, which was expanding the level of analysis. But it wasn't until I came here and some of the conversations that I got involved in that I realized that even I was not seeing the full implications of what I needed to do. So welcome to the dining area of the Institute. And at 12:30 every afternoon, this place is buzzing. It's buzzing with the conversations that take place between the various fellows that are here. And that's a really important part of the story I want to tell today. And I'll come back to that in a moment. If you remember, a central theme, a central conceptual theme of my work was this idea of visibility. What we see, what we don't see, and how we enable ways of seeing things that are very familiar. And I wanted to do that with time. I wanted to use a visualization tool to be able to enable people to see the type of, as we said, capture the idea of the swamp and give people the freedom, the flexibility, the agency to make better decisions about what they want to do and how they want to change. And that was fine. That worked. Technically, it has worked itself into what is a long document, as you will see, that I've produced after my fellowship. It's a process study that evolves over 18 years, and I've broken it down into those 18 years. But there was a sting in the tail. There was a sting in the tail, something that I had to deal with in terms of how I was doing what I was doing. What was the level of analysis? And I was focusing primarily on the individual. I was making context visible, but what I was missing and what I knew I had to do when I came back to the Institute was to think more broadly about the level of the group, the team, the organization. And I had incorporated that into the last parts of the study, and I thought I had made the changes. But I also felt something uncomfortable about the nature of the study. I knew something had changed in the wider environment, not just around the what and the how of the study, but the why, the logic I did it in the first place. And that was to enable the transition to a very different world, literally to help save the planet in terms of what we do and how we do with that move to renewables. Some of you may be aware of the fact that that renewables discourse has also been tied up with another narrative around energy security. And that has had a big impact with a lot of the fossil fuel companies in terms of how they're focusing back on a lot of their traditional businesses. That did not make me feel good. But I didn't have a way of articulating that, of making sense of that, until I came to the Institute. And that brings me back to here. Because I was sitting in this spot when I spoke with a colleague who was a fellow. And she had a very different perspective. She had a wider level of knowledge. She was a sociologist. And she made me think about time, which is central to what I wrote in my study here, at a very different level, at an ideological level. How time can be used by elites to foster their own interest, to focus more on the present. It's very important in terms of time at a broader level within this project to think about very different futures, but that is not happening at the moment. There's more of an element in terms of looking to energy security as a way of sort of the old ways of the past, okay? That really changed the way I thought about this work. It changed what I actually did afterwards, and it changed the nature of how I have interacted with that company subsequently. In effect, in April 2024, while I was here, I walked away from the transaction. That way of thinking was was incredibly important to this. That's what the Institute did. And that's something I'd like to explore in a little bit more detail with the director of the Institute, Sadi Lalou. So, Sadi, are you comfortable enough if I just do the intro and then we can...
Absolutely.
And then, we can just riff it from that, sort of, and I have I thought I would come back to the image that I started with, which is Donald Schoen's idea of the mountaintop and the swamp, sort of, and that is what I do in my practice for a long time, translating between the mountaintop and the swamp. But actually, I think a nice element of this is the fact that I needed to go back to the mountaintop to see some of the issues in my swamp. Okay, right? And to me, as I've thought about it, we can have conversations with colleagues in the department or wherever, okay? But there are people who, they're in the same area as us, they're in the same, sort of, they may have different perspectives or whatever it is. But I think the thing that distinguishes here is the quality of conversations because of the different backgrounds, the different perspectives, the different disciplines. I had the same conversation over lunch today, and she said to me this whole thing about, just, I'm a historian, that's a sociologist. You sometimes just have to explain some of the things you take for granted, okay? And that brings you to a different place.
Because the best way to learn is to teach. So you're forced to clarify your own thought to transmit it. But there's something more here. Is that there's no pecking order. When you're in your own department, in fact, there's a bit of a rivalry. It's not just the fact that we're in the same swamp. It's I've often noticed that people would hesitate talking about what they're doing before it's published. Because the audience might actually use their ideas. Okay. Here, these guys are not going to use their ideas. They're working on something different, and they're benevolent. There is no kind of calculation or anything. So it's pretty free speech. You're much freer to speak here than you would be in your own department. That's the amazing. It's liberating. I mean, there's the normal thing about discussion being a way to force you to clarify your ideas, to open new avenues, and so this has been known for a long time. But here, what you get is you have different people with different background, different experience, different skill set in intellectual terms, in methodologies or theories, and they sort of can take you to what we call the next level. I don't know if it's a higher level or a further, but I've always been fascinated by this notion of the proximal zone of development of Vygotsky, right? So stuff you can't do yourself, but if you're guided, you can actually move. And so people here would actually facilitate you to take a step in directions where you would not be able to go because you just don't know, right? And then they would say, but have you read so and so? But of course you have not read so and so. But then they will start to explain. This is why it would be interesting to read so and so because they did this and they did that, and then suddenly you see something that connects with what you have, and then you're able to take the step. And maybe you're going to read so and so. But so that's the kind of thing that happened, and it would not happen spontaneously if we would not put people in this space, because this is a space, this is a platform, we put people together, and it's like in a kind of reactor, or chemical reactions. You have to force the conditions of heat, pressure, and the existence of the various components, so you get something different. So this is what we do. We bring the space, we put people in it, and then we have these processes to force a little bit, gently, like the lunch.
I remember you telling me, and I couldn't get my head around this. They said there are a few basic requirements. You come here, and one thing is that you have to have lunch. And I'm thinking, how does this sound? This sounds almost too much like Sadi, sort of. But actually, it is the most powerful thing to get people together every day when you've spent time thinking in the morning. And to build on the thought you had there, they bring you forward by bringing you back, okay? Because some of those conversations you have over lunch, you've been moving forward and thinking about these things during the morning, and you've been going to funny places, but you nearly need to go back to make the connection to move forward.
Okay. That's interesting. I was thinking naively of the nudge as, you know, when you eat with people, they can't be your enemy.
Yes.
And there's something about human beings, like if you have shared food, like you have something in common. You need an enormous amount of trust when you're in your proximal zone, because you're hesitating. And so if you're not sure what you're saying, like you feel like maybe they're going to think I'm stupid because I don't really know, you don't dare to ask or whatever. But if it's with trusted people, you can actually accept your ignorance.
Yeah.
And ignorance can be openness, right? It's a gift. I've always thought that there's a kind of heuristic of ignorance, because if you read too much of the literature, you know, anything you know pre-formats what you perceive, right? And so you need to accept to be unformatted if you want to do something really different, which is what we want here. We want people to go beyond what they would have done in their usual environment. And so accepting that you're ignorant and there may be something else, you have to be open to the suggestions of other people. And lunch is a great place for this, or the wine and conversation. The idea that you must put people in a you know, demilitarized zone. This is what we do with our universities also, because they're also a bit in competition. But when they're here, you know, there's no competition here. It's just cooperation. I think human beings are always, because they're both cooperative and competitive, they are hierarchical, and so but the good thing is to use this is not competition. It is emulation. You want to do more together.
Well, it's strange you say that, and it's strange you say how the various processes and they come to work, because even as I think about it more, and I said a little bit earlier how important it was to sit at lunch beside someone, but if I think where the germ of that idea came from, it came from the first night that I came, and we stood together in the drinks reception, and she said to me, you know, tell me what you do, right? Okay, and then she had been thinking about that, and she forced me to think about it a little bit more the next time we met. But again, it's that wonderful Vygotskian notion of ignorance and the like. It was the trust in being able to say that, right? From her ignorance point of view, saying, well, please, you know, you tell me, and tell me in a way that I might understand, okay? And that was good for her, that was good for me. It gave her time to process, and then it gave her time to give me some feedback, you know?
And there's another thing that we try to do here is because people come with an idea and a specific topic, and actually what we're interested usually is having people get to that next level. And one question we ask them is, what is the general problem of which your research is one specific, you know, case, right? And so to go deeper into something more generic, what's important beyond the specific case, and this forces you to clarify and sort of to get rid of all this theoretical vernacular with which you dress your stuff, right? Like, what's actually the core human existential problem that's behind it? And because you're talking with people from other fields or other disciplines, you need to come to a level of generality that they can understand. Because if you speak, you know, with your very specific stuff, they don't. And this forces you to go beyond all this apparatus of theories and terms and terminology that we use to make ourselves feel more scientific, perhaps, or but then to go to the core, the kind of thing that people usually call, like, silly questions, difficult ones. They go like that. Why are you doing research on that? What are you talking about? And of course, if you discuss that with, as you said, someone asks you sincerely, I really want to understand, but then try to explain to me, okay? Then you're forced to sort of take away all this skin and go to the bone, like, this is my problem.
I think that's lovely.
Love that.
Something you said there, somebody once said to me that sometimes when you get so detailed into and when we become so in love with our subjects and so specialist areas, we almost lose connection with reality because we live in a referenced reality. We live in a way of thinking about it because of references that exist.
Absolutely, yeah.
And something like this forces you to think, well, how do I connect with the real world? How does it connect with ways of, again, this idea that we spend a lot of time sense making. I guess what it forces you to do is to be a sense giver, right, to other people in a way that they can understand.
Absolutely. And sadly, because a lot of our time in research is in a way justifying where we are within the field or advancing the career, etc. We spend a lot of time referring to other people in the field. I know we're all like dwarfs on the head of giants, shoulders of giants and everything, but you know, a lot of what we're doing is not about trying to understand the core of the matter and all these social aspects of positioning in the field. And to some extreme, some people in academia are just doing, you know, discourse on discourse instead of discourse on the phenomena, which is our job in the great division of labor of society. And here, because you're away from this academic game, you can focus on what's important, which is your research on the phenomenon and not your position in the field. And we try to keep that kind of, it's a social bubble, but it's not isolated from the phenomena because precisely you have more time to work on what you're supposed to do.
And we've known each other for years, and we come from similar types of backgrounds before we came into academia, and we've had lots of conversations about theory and practice and the like, and that's a theme that came out in my work. And you've been trying to persuade me for a long time to come here, and for various reasons it didn't work, but the 1-month fellowship has been sort of a relatively recent innovation, right? That has allowed people to come on this writing period. And I often wondered what you could do in a month. And in a way, you pulled a trick on me because, you know, I came here for a month and it's been very difficult for me to forget it for the subsequent 7 months because it almost sort of, you've got 8 months work out of me, okay, because what was planted as a seed then starts to grow.
I'm sorry about that, Barry.
No?
But no, I'm not sorry. I mean, that's what happened to me, okay, when I came here. It enabled me to actually really start the first chapter of what became a big book. Because there's moments where you need to have unfragmented time to think, right? And that's the most difficult moment, that's starting it, right? Getting the vision and sort of understanding that you can actually do it. But we're so much torn apart by all the little everyday interruptions and needs, etc. We don't have time for a bit of deep thought, but once you've had that, it's like it started and it goes forward, and that's what the guys at the Nomis Foundation perhaps call the spark, right? So you have to create this, and once it's ignited, but finding a new direction in the mess of all the document, the data, the talks, whatever that you have, is, you know, there's some kind of cognitive overload, but then once you have time to let that sink down and get into order, and you get a sort of bird's eye view of the problem, or you see the angle, and then I mean, scientists, researchers are so excited that once they found the right angle, you just can't stop them because that's why they are scientists. There's this desire and curiosity, but it's so sad that this is not happening so much in universities, because universities are, you know, this is about transmitting knowledge and disciplines, but what you learn new is necessarily at the border, and so it's difficult to do at the same time this exploration and this exploitation of knowledge, which is the core business of university.
It's very interesting. It picks up on a theme, and maybe one last thing on that is, picks up, you know, at the core of the problem within my discipline has been this notion of transmitting and transfer versus translation, you know, and a lot of what we've talked about today is that ability to translate ideas. Could I pick up on an image? I started this by talking about an image that was important to me from Donald Shawn in his book, The Reflective practitioner, and this idea of the mountaintop and the swamp, and I saw my role coming to here as being, telling the story of that 18 years of work that I did in terms of sort of moving from the mountaintop to the swamp and translating that. It almost feels to me that the bit that I learned here was that I needed to go back to the mountaintop a little bit to make, I had done a lot of work down to the swamp, and I'd become so swampified that and I needed to not only find a space between theory and practice and to be in that translator role, but I needed to go back to the mountaintop to be able to have those conversations, to be able to see, literally see what I could not see when I was so in the swamp.
And this is so important because people in the swamp need the map. And so what you get when you're up there is a global vision, which requires a bit of time and serenity to see. I remember there's in one of his books, Michel Serres wrote that there's two ways of knowing a territory. So one is to have the aerial map, and the other one is to go through all the roads, right? And people in the swamp, I mean, they're down there, but they hardly get the bird's eye view. And to make a map, a good map, you must have been down there. You must have been inside, which many of our colleagues haven't done. And this is why your work is so precious, because so many people teach management and have never been in charge, and etc. So, but then just knowing how to navigate the roads doesn't give you the direction to go really far, and so you need somebody who draws a map, and I think that's actually what you've been doing on your work on the theory of practice. So because everything we perceive pre-formats everything we know pre-formats what we perceive, and so if you give the people the right map and the right knowledge, then they will be able to interpret what they have much better. And so I think that's what you've got from being so much traveling in the swamp from the others, and know how to talk to people who are feet in the water. Then you can tell them in the proper way what's the map. So I think if the Institute can have helped a little bit in this, we've done our job.
I think the Institute has done more than that. And one of the things I said a little bit earlier, I thought I came here to think. I thought I came here to think at a certain level. I thought at a different level. And it actually did more than that. I changed a lot of what I do as a consequence, some very profound changes. So, Sadi, listen, thank you. Thank you very much for this. And thank you at multiple levels, especially for this experience. So, thank you.
Thank you for having come, because the Institute is just a place, but what happens is what people bring to it. So thank you, Barry.